Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, I guess it was a good thing that Dodgy made that comment in that video about mask wearing that upset one of my viewers, and she left me a comment, so I made a video about it. Then I got a number of other comments from people who reacted similarly to his, what he said about masks in that video, because it goes against what people in the truth community believe. And I'm talking about Kamlesh Patel Daji, the current master and president of the Heartfulness System. And I got a number of responses that, made me feel like, plus after I went to bed, I realized I listened to the video while it was going up, like I was uploading, it was late. And I realized there was more to say about this that I think is important so people understand the essence of the Heartfulness System and what it's for, because it isn't about truther stuff, because truther stuff is a vehicle. For most people, it's a vehicle to get you to realize that you've been indoctrinated by a system that's taken you in the wrong direction. And so it's a catalyst for you to get back on the right path. It's not a path in itself. And so if you become a truther or you die a truther, you don't make that adjustment to something else, right? And I'm talking about people in the truth community that therefore then try to fix the system politically. This is what I've been saying all along. See, for me, being a truther was never really about awakening to the negativity of the system, because growing up and not fitting in with the system, being dyslexic, being an introvert, being just whatever I was, I already knew the system was messed up. But the truther stuff was, validation. It was like, okay, this is why you felt like this whole time. And so for me, it wasn't about waking up. It was about validation. It just interests me. It interests me. It's something that, it's very complex, and it's a very compelling narratives, and just the, all of it, the machinations and the, mindset of what I call the controllers and the way people respond to it. I'm interested in psychology. I was always interested in why people do what they do. And so this thing is very interesting. It's a lot more interesting than the official story. But in terms of what I would do with this information is change my orientation from the materialistic world and start a spiritual journey, which is what I already had done before really diving into the truth community. Before there even was like the truth community as we now know it, I had already done that, 10 years ago with the Heartfulness meditation. And so in my experience, what I believe is that the reason that people are waking up in terms of the truther narratives, and it's, different for each person, but a healthy response is you realize that as long as you're focused on just the material wing, just your material life, and a materialistic system like the system we have, you're missing out on something. It's always going to have corruption and cheating and dissatisfaction. It's always going to be unfair. It's always going to have, it's just limited, very limited. The material world is very limited in terms of your personal growth and development, and it's not why you're here. We're not here to be indulgent Americans. And so, the American system, more than anything else, has taken us away from our true purpose and our true goal, and waking up to the corruption or the shadow government of the American system gives you the opportunity to say, well, then what is my purpose? What's my goal? What am I doing here? Why am I here? And in a healthy response or a spiritual response to this, you'd figure out that your true purpose is for your soul to advance spiritually by you living correctly and moving along on your spiritual journey in your material life. That you use your material life as a vehicle for your soul to gather information and have experiences that brings your soul closer and advances your soul along this spiritual path. And so in that sense, the truth community is never meant to be an end in itself. It's a stepping stone. And so in the Heartfulness meditation, whenever you have attachment to something, it might be, some, physical thing or some ideology or something that prevents your connecting to God, that acts as a block to your connection to God, which for most people in the truth community, people get obsessed with the truth community, and it ends up blocking and hurting them. It might be a great thing in the beginning when you start to wake up and you feel validated, and now you have a sense of the truth, and all of a sudden all these things make sense to you, and so it's a very positive thing. But if you just stay staring into the abyss, there's been many people who are truthers. You think about how long I've been doing this, and why my videos get better and my perception of the thing gets better, because I'm not like, I don't, I'm staring to the abyss as my goal, right? There's lots of truthers who stare into the abyss, stare into the cesspit, and they go mad, right? Again, this I've been talking a lot about the Palantir, or whatever it is, that that orb from the Lord of the Rings, Palantir, I think it's called. I think I nailed it. Like the 10th try. Stare into the orb, and they just go mad. And so if you stare into the abyss of all the things that are the pyramid, the capstone, and the controllers, and Illuminati, and all these things, and you're constantly obsessed with what you consider the enemy, and the devil, or whatever it is, then you're going to be pulled over to that side just because you're focused on that, and it's going to contaminate your heart with their energy. And that's what happens to a lot of truthers. That's why they get aggressive, and they flip out mentally, and they turn on their audience. And you see this happening with the Q movement now, and you see it happen with Alex Jones and other people. They lose it because they're just staring into the darkness all the time, without any sense that it was never about that, right? All you need is enough information and maybe a few reminders of what the system represents, and then get motivated to do something else and find your true purpose on planet Earth. And so in the heartfulness system, if you're attached to an ideology that's blocking your spiritual advancement, which I think that most people who are really, into the truther stuff, eventually it's going to prevent you from fully understanding the true purpose, and also hold you back from your spiritual journey. It might be a catalyst in the beginning, like I said, but it's lots of different things. It isn't just truther stuff. Everybody who has an over-attachment, or is, not seeing things as they are to whatever it is, and their ego might be attached to something. And there's a lot of liberal people in the heartfulness system that take like an egotistical beating because the master of the system says something that they don't like. This happens over and over again, especially in the beginning. All these hippies came into the heartfulness system, and it's a discipline. The heartfulness system has a discipline to it, and all these hippies wanted it to be free and loose and free love and things like this, and that caused lots of problems. And a bunch of them went through some existential crisis because they were believing in the hippie stuff, but now they loved and were benefiting from the heartfulness system, and there was a contradiction there. And the same thing is going to happen for truthers and people in the truth community, because it basically has to happen, right? There has to be this confrontation between, when one thing is blocking the other, and you have to move from one thing to the other, and at least lighten, have a lighter attitude about the, truther stuff, and see a big picture. And so that's not what happened with Daji's comments. Like, that wasn't intentionally done by him. It's, his comments are something else, but these comments are acting as a catalyst for many people who have heard about the, the heartfulness system through me and have a truther orientation. And, the comments were kind of a bummer to hear. And I'll explain this because I went through this personally. It's kind of a long story, but I'm going to talk about this. And, I actually quit for a while. Like, I might quit doing heartfulness, twice. And, it was a really tough couple of years. I didn't really quit because, it was like I was, pretending I was quitting. I thought I was quitting, but I knew, deep down I couldn't, because it was my purpose. And what I went through sucked, but then at the end it was so great because it cleaned out all this stuff. It made me a better person, and I made me buy into the heartfulness system more. So it activated a cleaning, right, which was positive. like it was a positive thing, but it wasn't positive, at least in terms of my experience of it in the beginning. Like the beginning of a cleaning, and people go through these things quite often in terms of their, people have an idealistic view of what a spiritual system should be like and a spiritual master should be like and all these things. And then reality sets in. And so the heartfulness system has a lot of truther stuff in it. And I'll get into that in terms of the literature and the teachings, but it's very clear, and it needs to be this way, that it isn't a truther organization, and it isn't overtly working to confront any governments or any powerful systems around the world. It's not working as an adversarial entity, which is a lot of what the truther community is about, like this sort of mano-a-mano thing with the government and the media and all these things. And you can see there's a difference in my videos because I'm not in a mano-a-mano battle with the government or anything else, right? I'm just, reporting on this or joking about it or whatever, offering my insights. There was that one time I suggested we boycott various companies because of whatever, and it didn't work, and I realized, and it was the only way that something would work. We had an economic weapon at our disposal. This is during the apocalypse in 2016, or whatever it was, 2015 or 16, whenever that went down. And, there was no interest in it, and I really wasn't into it either because I knew that there was a spiritual solution, and I knew the system was ultimately coming down. And this is something that people who do the heartfulness system and read the literature understand, that, the system doesn't have to be taken down, and the people that control the system aren't as powerful as people think, because the system has already been taken down by Babaji years ago. Like, he documented this in his diary. Babaji, the second master of the heartfulness system, was somebody who was, all the masters of the system have this done, but he had this, specific purpose where he was this incredible channeler, a medium, where he could go and just talk to any spiritual being. I mean, there was no, various people who are psychic or have channeling abilities or mediums. It takes a lot out of them physically to connect to the spiritual world, and oftentimes they connect to negative entities. It's just not a very, it's not a well-developed science, and people are, there's some people with this talent and ability, but Babaji could just intercommune with any of the higher developed souls just as easily as he could go talk to his family or, people and, in the real world. I mean, he would just have this ability. And also he had all his spiritual points open and charged with this energy. And he had just such a simple and humble personality that he would just do God's bidding without any, pushback. Like when I get information that God wants me to do something, I almost always are kind of, really, like I'm always a little bit, a jerk about it. Like, I need to be pushed a little bit. It's not, just in my personality. I don't like, I don't like to be told. It just, it's a lot harder for me than it was, say, for Babaji just to do what he was ordered to do without any pushback and, any even thought about, questioning why or any of these things. Babaji met his spiritual master Lalaji like 7 or 8 times in his lifetime because they lived in neighboring villages, but his parents didn't want him to do spirituality. His mom forbid him from going and meeting gurus and things like this, mom and his dad or whatever it was. And so he snuck out of the house. Like, he snuck out of the house to go see his spiritual guru. And the majority of his spiritual journey happened after Lalaji had died. And he was intercommuning with Lalaji, and Lalaji was, telling him what was happening, and Babaji was going through this spiritual journey. And so at the end of it, he was this like perfect instrument to bring the world to a spiritualized state, to bring the world to where people in the future would have a deep relationship with God. And he was this example of what they could achieve, this sort of template of what the new human beings would be in, like, say, 5,000 years or whatever it might be. Some period of time for this evolutionary process where human beings will resonate on a higher level of vibration and consciousness. And Babaji was given orders by, the spiritual hierarchy that, that works for God, because they need a physical, they need someone in human form to do this work. And Babaji was this divine being, like he had all of this spiritual power. This American lady once asked Babaji, like, what can you do? And he said, I can spin the universe like a top only with God's permission. But without God's permission, I can't even take a glass of water, a sip of water, right? And so some of the things that he was ordered to do was create World War II, like that was something that needed to happen, and get the British out of India. Like he was this spiritual catalyst for making these things happen. And another thing that he has done, which is already in play now, is bring down the system as it is now, the materialistic system, and create a new system, the birth of a new system on the other side. And so in that sense, it's already been accomplished. This thing is going to happen, the system collapsing on itself, the system which is obviously in self-destructive mode, was done by, this master of the heartfulness system and can't be undone or reversed. And so heartfulness isn't about taking the system down or confronting the evildoers or the people who run the system, because the system's already coming down. It's about bringing people over, anybody who's willing to do this, to being this, a new spiritual person, a saintly person. And so anybody who wants to do this can do it, right? Anybody who's willing to do this can do this. And so there isn't going to be some Trump-like struggle. You see how Trump struggled and was deplatformed and all these things. The heartfulness system can't do that. It has to use every available option, including governments or whoever it is, so that people can hear and experience the benefits of the system. The system itself isn't about anything to do with the world and the material world and feeding the poor and, curing the sick and all of these things that people think about in terms of spiritual organizations. It's not about the material world at all. It's not to reduce suffering. It's not to reduce poverty. It's not to make governments behave. It's not to make, any of these things, the materialistic system. It's about making people better. And when that happens, a lot of the problems that I just mentioned will disappear, right? It's to remove the corruption out of people's hearts, remove the abuse out of their hearts, remove all these negative things out of their hearts, and help them divinize themselves, make them the best reflection, the pure reflection of their souls and what God wants them to be at the highest level. And when that happens, society and the system, the governmental system and all these things will be a pure reflection of that, and it won't be anything like it is now. And so it's not about changing the material system, but changing the internal world of the people that come to it so that they can manifest a better world. And that's still not the goal. That's just a side effect. The important part is that people now have an internalized relationship with God and they're back on their soul's path, which isn't happening right now. People are disconnected from their souls and we see the results before us. And so the system is about people having a deeper relationship with their soul and God internally. Again, I keep on explaining this in these videos, and that brings about a balanced state in our governments and all these other things. And so we'll be better people, we'll be more evolved people, and so more evolved people will have a better system. And that's, so it's not about the system itself, it's about changing the people. So I'm going to explain this, how I, realized all this in story form with my own personal process that I went through. So I realized this, and I came against things that, you guys are now realizing in terms of things that, as a truther, is going to bum you out because it's just not supported in the system like it should be, or at least acknowledged as legitimate. See, the problem that I had, well, let's start with the UN thing. And so because of my personality, I was aware of a lot of various narratives that would be alternative news or, alternative ideas or narratives or, things that we call truther narratives now. And things I just saw, like I could just see, right? I could see the BS. I just turn on the news and I could see they were disingenuous and lying, and my ability to read people. I was in college. My brother was a Vietnam vet, and he told me about the Federal Reserve, and he was one of the OG of the truth community back when nobody did this. And then later on, he had his own radio show. So he told me truther things. And I also went to this sort of liberal hippie college in Springfield College School of Human Services, which is for like adult people on weekends. It was my second attempt at college. And they have some, liberal version of truther narratives like Howard Zinn's People's History of the U.S. and things like that, right? If you've read that book, which is from the, history from the perspective of the people who were oppressed. And so there's various things that I was aware of already, things to do with medicine. My ex and things was aware of some things. And so, there was this element to get away from the mainstream system. And then all the things that I read about in Heartfulness that were talking about, the changes to the world that were to come and some of the negative things about the world. And so there was this movement, within my family to live on a homestead and help prepare our kids for the inevitable collapse of the system, not in some doomsday sort of situation. See, one of the things that is stressed in the Heartfulness system is it's not some sort of doomsday cult or something like that. Like, that these things are coming, that they're not, hiding away from the collapse of the system and the need for human beings to change. But, they want you to live a normal life for whatever that means now. And, whatever is going to come will come. Not to panic and not to do things that are, that's going to worry your family or whatever, right? And they don't want people, like, for example, there were a couple of kids that came from Alabama to visit Master Charji in India. And I was talking to this guy from Alabama, one of the older guys. And he said, yeah, they didn't tell their parents. So they traveled there like college-age kids. And they came to India. And they didn't communicate what was going on. They didn't check in with their parents. And their parents were, whatever. They were maybe conservative parents from a southern state or something. And they're worried that their kids are in some sort of a cult. And they called the ashram. And Master Charji found out about it. It was like he called the kids into his office and said, call your parents, right? They're worried about you. Not only are you making your parents worry, but you're giving this meditation system a bad name. We're not trying to take people away from their families or, make people suffer. These are the kind of things they want to encourage, that this is a system that's going to make the family come together, that you'll have, there's this respect for elders in the Indian tradition and things like this. And so even though there's information that would alarm people, there's these prophecies in the Whispers of the Brighter World books, which I guess I'll talk about that now. And so in 2005, the first Whispers of the Brighter World book was released. Now, there had been some prophecy. There was a chapter called My Vision from Babaji's Reality at Dawn, where he talked about remaking the world, and, America was on the verge of, having possibly be reduced to paupery is the word that he used, and things like that. That's just America. But he talked about, a vision. There was some, island that was going to sink into the sea. I think it was England. I mean, based in what he was saying, he didn't say it was England, but it seemed like that. And so if you heard that and you were living in England, you'd kind of freak out, right? But he wanted to make sure, the system, that, just live your life now, maybe prepare or whatever, but prepare internally and realize things are changing. We're in a changing period. But then the Whispers from the Brighter World came out, and it was something completely new. And Master Charji said there was this special book that was being released, and he didn't say what it was. And so the book came out, this beautiful book, and it was like expensive, and it came in this case, and it was leather bound, and has, I'll show I'll show what it looks like at some point with these beautiful pictures and things. And Master Charji wrote this incredible introduction to it. And what it was, I've said this before, that there was this French woman who was a practitioner of the Heartfulness system. And at a young age, she had gotten to this horse accident. She fell off a horse, and she had back surgery, and she called the surgeon a butcher. And he basically, the way it worked out was she was in constant pain for the rest of her life, debilitating pain. And that helped her drive her into this position of being this excellent medium. And she was given these channel messages by all these higher developed spiritual beings, but most of them came from Babaji, Babaji, who had passed away in 1985. So she started to write these messages down in like 1994 or something like this. And she wasn't even sure. Like, she kind of doubted herself, and she was like, this isn't real. And Babaji sent a message through somebody else who was also, who was a medium, not as good a medium, but somebody he could communicate with, another woman. And the woman showed up at this, the first woman's house and said, Babaji told me to tell you that these messages are real. And so she went through this consistently. She doubted herself and all these things. But she was somebody who was, there was this woman, Sister Nadivita, the Swami Vivekananda, a famous Indian saint, a higher developed soul that belonged to the Ramakrishna mission. He went to America. He was friends with Tesla and things. But he went to America, and he didn't have any money, or he ran out of money, and he was like sleeping on the stairs. And this wealthy woman from Chicago, American woman from Chicago, found him there and brought him home and cleaned him up, and he started to talk to her, and she realized he's a saint, right? This higher developed soul. And he went and spoke in front of, I don't know, some authority, some university. He gave these famous speeches in America. And then she became like his disciple. And this woman was, that woman in a past life. And she was, I think, Sister Teresa Avila or something like this, who was who called herself the Pen of God or something. She was another medium. So she had been, a channeler and a medium in past existences. And she started to take these messages, and at some point, these messages were sent to Master Charji, who was kind of bummed at first. Because, and like I said, Master Charji was like this perfect person. I mean, he was just somebody who was good at everything. Babaji said, like, Parthasarthi is a very capable person. That's his first name. He's a competent person. And how many competent people that are good at being human beings do you know? Like, how many people are really good at human life, right? Like, all across the board, that they don't have a lot of issues and struggles and things. And, Master Charji was one of these people. And Babaji had been such a medium, right? Like, he would just, sit there, he'd be talking, he'd be smoking his hookah, and there'd be a circle of people, some Indians, some, hippies from Europe and America, and he'd smoke his hookah. And all of a sudden he'd look off and he would be intercommuning with Lalaji. Or sometimes he would be giving a sitting, where he would be transmitting and cleaning the hearts of these people. They would come to his house because there's no ashrams and things back then. So they'd be staying at Babaji's house, and Babaji would give him these sittings. And all of a sudden, in the middle of sitting, Babaji would flop down on the floor. He was sitting in a chair, and he would just sit on the floor. And then he'd say, after the sitting, Lalaji came, and he sat in the seat and gave the rest of the sitting. And so this was the kind of relationship Babaji had with what we call the brighter world in the heartfulness system. And so when he was training Master Charji to be his representative, when Babaji was training Charji to be his successor, he opened up all these spiritual points, including the point that made it, made him have the ability to open up and communicate with higher developed souls in the brighter world, right? And so Master Charji went through this difficult period when Babaji died, where he was challenged, where there was like this insurrection within the heartfulness system, where which I had no idea how big it was. I knew it was there. But Kamlesh came out, Daji came out and said he had been reading through Master Charji's diaries. They had published some of the diaries, but the later ones they hadn't published. They weren't going to publish them in his lifetime. And Daji had the task of reading through them, and they were upsetting to him, like how badly Charji was treated. Like, after Babaji died, like 90% of the people who did the heartfulness system rejected Master Charji. Like, they all had suffering. Lalaji, I talked about how he was born into a wealthy family, and a British Raj, a king, taxed the family's wealth away. His dad died. His mom died when he was young, just like with Master Charji. Master Charji's first memory was seeing his mom packed in ice when he was 5, right? Because what happens is when we're 7 or 8 years old, our brains do this pruning of all these synapses, and we forget all our childhood memories for the most part. But if we have a trauma in our childhood, we'll have like a specific memory that sticks. Like, we all have some fleeting memories from our, when we were toddlers. And his first memory, his oldest memory, was of his mom being packed in ice after she died of childbirth. And Lalaji, the first master of the system, his mom died when he was young, and then his dad was reduced to paupery, reduced to being a poor person, lost everything, and he died. And Lalaji began his life as an adult in poverty, and he eventually got a job as a babu or clerk, just like Babaji. Babaji ended up getting a very similar job. Then later on in life, Lalaji died in his 50s, and he had this, abscess, a hole in his liver, which is extraordinarily painful, and he had it for a number of years. So, the masters of the heartfulness system have had a lot of suffering. Babaji was considered a simpleton by his mom. They thought he would never amount to anything. She was always sort of running him down and things like this. Wouldn't let him go be a spiritual person. I guess Babaji's wife was, sort of nagged him a lot. I mean, she was a nagger. And when he started to be a spiritual master and people started to come to him for spiritual training, his wife and his mom were like, "You're a fraud." Like his mom was like, "What God did you ever see that you could deliver God to these people?" Like they were mocking him and stuff, right? And so his neighbors, I mean, they didn't know why. Like they had all these Europeans and stuff. Like I told that story. There was this, this guy who used to be a hippie in the 60s. He was a funny guy, one of the guys I've known for a while in the heartfulness system. And he said he got off the train and going to Shah Jahanpur, where Babaji lived, which was in this rural, poor, sort of not so great place in northern India. Master Charji was joking. I think I was sitting there when he gave this talk, but it might have been on a video, but either way. So he's giving this talk and he says, I went to Shah Jahanpur. It was such this dirty place, and it was filled with dacoits, robbers and things like this. Like Babaji would walk down the street with a stick, to beat away the monkeys and the robbers. Like there'd be this little, Babaji was 5 foot, just a small 110, 20-pound man in a place that was so remote. And then there was people from, white people coming from Europe and America and Russia and places like that, right? All these different places for spiritual training. And the people in the village had no idea, couldn't understand that, right? That's the story I was going to tell. This guy, this hippie guy said, he got off this train and they're going into, Shah Jahanpur, this place that's so remote, and they'd have to get a train to a train, and the train arrived at the station at 2 a.m. And I heard for a number of people who went through this travel, and they were out in this rural place and, coming from America or Europe, and they were completely, it was frightening and just, and after, see, when you travel from America or Europe, especially from America, and you go through, 2 flights that are 18 hours total and layovers and things. I mean, some of my trips from America to India ended up being 36 hours, and counting the driving to the airport, they were 2 or 3 days. And so by the time you get to India, you get off the plane and you're just wiped, right? You're just, disoriented and all these things. Anybody who's traveled there knows. And then on top of that, they had to take a 2-day train to this remote place in Shah Jahanpur, and they get off the train and they were he's disoriented, right? And so they're looking around trying to find Babaji's place. I mean, it's early in the morning by then, because, and he sees these these Amazon women, these tall, blonde, sort of European women from Denmark coming out of Babaji's house. He goes, "Oh, it's got to be that one." So, Babaji had that in his neighborhood, right? People didn't know why they were coming to see him, because everyone thought he was an idiot, he was, somebody who was, they didn't consider him to be something special. They didn't know who he was. And I was saying, Master Charji told this story, and he said, I went to Shah Jahanpur, and I was there can't be a worse place than this in India, right? And he said, then I visited Fatehgarh, where Lalaji, the first master, was born, and he said, oh, there is a worse place. And he said, but here I am in Chennai, which is a big city, and they have this nice ashram, and, it's better accommodations. And so he said, Master Charji said, at least with each version of the Heartfulness Masters, they get a better place. And now Master Daji is in Hyderabad in this beautiful ashram there. But back in Babaji's day, all these Brahmins, the Brahmin caste people, Master Charji was a Brahmin, and there started to be a lot of Brahmins that did the heartfulness system, and they lived in southern India where it was always warm, right? It was always hot. Like my kids and I, when we were at the ashram, it was like it never got below 74 degrees the entire time we were there. Like I monitored the weather, and that's at night. Like early in the morning, it was 74 degrees, and then some days it was 80, but it stayed pretty consistent. And so that's how hot it is in Chennai. And there are people that were in warmer parts of India, and they come to Chennai and they'd be wearing earmuffs. My kids and I would be like, they're wearing earmuffs because their bodies were used to, 100 plus days, 100-degree days plus days every day. And 80 degrees was too cold for them. They'd be wearing jackets and earmuffs and things. But these Brahmins from Chennai and, the Tamil Nadu state of India would come up to get spiritual training from Babaji in northern Shahjahanpur, which is a higher elevation, and it got 40 degrees, even freezing sometimes, maybe even I don't know if they had snow there, but it was something they were completely foreign to them, and they didn't bring winter clothes. And Babaji had these buildings, and it was like basically sleeping in a garage or a basement for us, and they'd be sleeping on newspapers. And Babaji would wake them up at 4 a.m. and give these blissful meditations, right? Just, out of this world meditations. And at some point, because all of these various castes have this ritualistic bathing, especially the Brahmins. And so Babaji bought this water heater. And so they'd get up and they'd fill the water heater with well water, and they start heating the water so they could take their bath before these 4 a.m. meditations that were just, like out of this world. Like people would go like in, these cosmic experiences and things, right? And, by the Master Charji said by the time the water had heated, the sitting would already be starting, so they would use cold water anyway. And so it was, Babaji used to say, minimal comforts and maximum spiritual benefit. And so, all these spiritual masters, when I get back to my original story about the whispers, I got off in a tangent here, but the spiritual beings have a human side. So Babaji went to build an ashram in Shahjahanpur, his, where he lived, and he was freaked out about it. He said that all the neighbors were going to call it Ramchandra's folly, that he was going to be a failure and he'd be the laughing stock of this small town. I mean, he was somebody who had already had achieved spiritually something that no other human being have ever achieved. It was beyond, anybody's achievement. And he's worried about what his neighbors were going to think when he, built this ashram, and everyone's going to think because no one believed that people were coming to see him, right? Even his own family were, mocking him and things, his mom and his wife and stuff, And so, he had these kids that weren't great kids, and 2 of them died and 1 of them committed suicide. I mean, and he had all these real life troubles, and he had this, because he was a human being and had to experience these things. And his life was so hard, and Master Charji's life was maybe even harder, that when I complain and I look at their life, I'm like, well, geez, like my life isn't nearly as bad as theirs. It's one of the things that sort of kept me going. So they're an example of what you can suffer through and still attain spiritual, your spiritual goal. There's this story where they were going to put marble floors down, because marble's a big thing in India. And, they were just starting to accept donations, and there was all these people coming to Babaji's house, and he could no longer accommodate them. At one point, he built a building, it would be just like an outdoor cement building with no, really anything, right? In terms of furniture, people would sleep on, basically rugs, like burlap, like a burlap bedding or something, like a burlap bag. There was this guy I talked to who came from Canada, and he said that Babaji was so excited about this building he built for Europeans, and Americans, because he thought Westerners, he thought it was, it was more cozy, like it was more upscale, and it was just like this basement. He said, he'd been staying there for a month or so, and there was dust everywhere. And so him and another practitioner of the heartfulness system decided to sweep it out and clean it out and, wash everything and mop. And he said, we got it like as clean as we could get it. And a wind blew in and all this dust came in, like just, So it was like that. But Babaji was so, happy about this building that he could finally accommodate Westerners at a higher standard of, because they were used to more comforts and things. But in terms of what we understand as comforts, it was, it's like sleeping in a outdoor basement or garage or something. So there's this story of Babaji buying this marble and, just stressing about it. And there was these dirt roads with potholes and like nothing we would consider, normal roads. And this is back in the 1950s and things like this. And so he's waiting for the marble to come to his ashram, and it gets there and it's just shattered. All the marble is shattered into all these pieces, And he just said, okay, just all right, just completely stressed and worried about it. But the roads were so bumpy and things like this. And so, this is a kind of humanness that he had. And all these spiritual masters, Krishna, Jesus, all of them, right? Buddha, they all had, and, saints and people that are higher developed souls all have like crappy stuff, human stuff they have to deal with and their own personality difficulties that they have to overcome, and something for people to be aware of. Because the way that they play these people in movies and the way that they're remembered by the religion isn't accurate, right? They don't bring the human piece to it. And the heartfulness system doesn't hide that. It doesn't, it wants you to understand that they're human just like you, and they suffer these same kinds of personality flaws and characteristics and things. So you understand that they're not something different, right? That they're not somehow so much better than you, that they had the same kind of struggles and the same kind of, things in their system, anger and things they had to overcome or whatever it might be, hatred and things. So going back to the whispers part, the whispers of the brighter world part of this story. So, Kamlesh Patel Daji was reading these things about how he was treated, by all these people. And then Daji published Master Charji's diary of this time period. And there was this other book that I was, reading along with it that had all these, letters and things. And I was kind of stunned at how, vulnerable. And I mean, Master Charji was this lion. He was just had this power. He was this big guy, had a gruff voice and things. And he always seemed just so confident and like together. But he went through such extraordinary pain and suffering. And all these people rejected him. And, he got poisoned. He was going over to people's houses. And Daji was saying they wouldn't feed him, which is, India has this thing about hospitality. He was basically begging these people to stay within the mission, right? Not to leave because they had a problem with him. And he was meeting with all these people. And, just because of his commitment to Babaji, like he had said before, he wanted to go. Like he was, like when he reached the goal of human life, when he reached what's called the central region, he said, no, now I can just leave the planet. Babaji said, no, I didn't help you accomplish this for yourself. Like you got to carry on this work, right? And so another guy showed up with a gun to shoot him, and there was all these lawsuits, and Babaji's kids tried to take possession of the mission and things, and he went through all these difficulties, and when he was nominating Daji Kamlesh, he made sure that this stuff didn't happen to Daji, because they all have, they all look at the person that, the master that they're following, right? And they want to do improvements. They see flaws, or they see things that might be mistakes, just like with your parents, right? You want to improve upon what your parents did. And so, Daji has that with, some of the old ways of doing things are not there anymore because the current master of the system is like trying to improve upon the previous one, right? And that's, part of this thing with the truther stuff. Like, you understand this. There's this element where you look at your teacher, or your guru, your trainer, or your parents, and you think you can do better, right? And so that's, something for everybody to aspire to. Like if you see a flaw or something that, you disagree with, then there's this element of, all right, well, I can improve upon that, right? And for future generations. But anyways, so Charji went through this difficult period of time, and he kept on waiting to intercommune with Babaji. Like he was being sued, and it took 13 years to settle all the various things to do with the ashrams and all the, who was in charge of the mission and brutal stuff. Like just, I didn't know it was as bad as it was. And I probably don't know the half of it. And so when this woman showed up and said she was getting messages from Babaji, and Master Charji had been waiting for years, so this is, I don't know, 12 years or so, he's been waiting to intercommune with Babaji, just like Babaji used to intercommune with Lalaji and these other higher developed souls. It never happened. And Master Charji was like, no, this can't be, right? And so he started to read the messages, and it took him a while to accept that they were legitimate and real, because, he had hoped that he would be the medium. But Babaji said to him in a message, you're just not, made this way. You're not a medium, and you need to do this other work, this other spiritual work, and this other work with the, the things that you're good at. Plus the amount of messages this woman delivered was, maybe 20,000 or so messages. It's like never been done on planet Earth before, these books. There's, I think, 8 books right now, and there's more messages that haven't been published. It's the most prolific messages of this type. You can't get the books right now. They're all out of print, and I don't know what's going on with them. They all sold out. But there's a Whisper of the Day, which you can get on the Sajmarg website, and they put out one message every day, which you can read. I read, those are something I consistently read on a daily basis. But in terms of the books, will be republished at some point. But anyway, so these books came out, and in the books there were these messages. There was a message from 2001 on September 13th, an epic message because of the event that had just happened, which I read in an earlier video. I might read it again here. And then there was all these messages that were basically truther messages, which were things I already knew about. And so, the internet was just opening up, and then there was all this truther stuff happening, which I was already aware of and doing research about a little bit. I was into it a little bit. But then when these Whispers messages came out, I realized, wow, I want to do more research. I want to find out what they're talking about. And so, I went on this massive research project, which has now become this YouTube channel. And I thought that people within the Heartfulness system would want to know what I had found, right? Because it was based in these messages from Whispers of the Brighter World. But the reaction I got, especially with the UN stuff, which came from that, was the kind of crappy reaction you get when you're a truther and people are trying to shut you down and dismiss your, the legitimacy of your point of view because you're some crazy conspiracy theorist. And that was a bummer. And that's what ultimately led me to quit. And I want to tell the story, but that's to understand this. And I'm going to read one of these messages so you understand what I'm talking about here. So this is a message from Babaji, and it's from Sunday, October 15th in 2000. And this is just one of many messages like this. There's a lot of loving messages and messages about spirituality, but there's a lot of truther messages. And this is just one of many. Pollution from electricity has drawn your attention for a long time. It is devastating, and human beings suffer the consequences in their subtle bodies, which then pass them on to the physical body. The earth is surrounded by a kind of net which seriously harms the gaseous exchange. This results in disturbances affecting the whole of the biosphere. This phenomena are felt all the way down to the infinitely small. Your energies try to adapt to these turbulences. Certain areas of the world are more affected than others. The oceans play an important role. They represent an enormous amount of water which neutralizes part of this pervading negativity, but there are limits to this process. The polarity of the earth, which is necessary for its balance, is permanently thwarted. New energies will have to be used in the future for the good of the planet and its inhabitants. Cries of alarm have been put forth for years by enlightened researchers whose pronouncements have received no follow-up. Only absolute necessity will force decisions by those countries who hold the greatest power. There remains a long way to lead human beings to a greater wisdom. The supremacy of money is boundless. May good decisions be made in time for the good of humanity. Babaji, the person the essence that is delivering the message, there's always a signature at the end of the message. So like I said, there were so many messages about money, power, and then there was these prophecies and things. And so the truth community was just being born then, which I believe came from Babaji's. In 2001, he gave a message, this message. I said, well, I might as well read that one as well. So this is dated Thursday, September 13th, 2001, 10 a.m. And this is after the big event that happened in 2001 in September. My son reacts to the present incidences as a high-level spiritual master must do by appealing for wisdom and love in response to this hatred, virulent scourge of the world. What can common mortals do isolated and helpless in the face of such attacks? This barbaric act sounds the death knell for human liberties. As we have just said in the previous message, there are limits not to be exceeded, and yet it will be necessary to go until the end of this cycle, so that irremediably this murderous madness is brought under control. You can only act by developing love in your hearts and building therein a worthy and equitable world blossoming through faith in a highly spiritual process. Only it can bring the greatest hope towards a happy humanity. Wake up if you're not yet awakened. Your time of action towards redemption on this earth is numbered. You have all of our blessings, Babaji. So I covered this recently, that Babaji always gave suggestions, and as do the masters of the heartfulness system, because there's supposed to be no force used in the system. And so this is strong language where he basically orders all the readers to wake up if you're not already awoken, which of course we know what waking up means. And because of his proximity, having merged in the source, whatever Babaji thought, said, or did, especially if there was a will behind it, a sankalpa, and there's clear force, there's clear power in this message, that him ordering people to wake up. And then right after that is when the truth community just exploded. This is in 2001, and the truth community and this term wake up happened, right? So because of all of these messages, and because I had young kids, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, younger even at this time, I thought that it would be prudent. Well, let me read this other message, because this will actually bring it more into context. Tuesday, September 10th, 2002. So this is a year later at 10 a.m. The time has come for human beings to seriously reflect on the ill effects of this industrial civilization that is destructive for the planet. There are many who utter cries of alarm which are not heard. The biggest polluters close their eyes on this aspect of things, seeing only profit in their well-lined bank accounts. Everything will stop by force of circumstance. Huge cataclysms will destroy what constitutes the industrial wealth of this century. This wealth does not benefit the poor countries, which are completely forgotten by the big owners of the world's capital. These comments are not politically oriented. Rather, we note an irrefutable fact that is serious for the future of humanity. Only the power of raging elements will be able to change the economic system. It will have to make a fresh and healthy start for the earth and for human beings by returning to the basics and simplicity through a more human way of working. Human beings have lost their taste for effort. They will have to relearn how to make use of their hands together with their minds. The rich, who will have lost everything, will become very poor, and the current poor will become even more destitute. The only ones to keep their treasure will be those who have nurtured it in their hearts, haloed with divine love. Babaji Maharaj. And so this is just a small microcosm of some of these messages. But receiving all of these types of messages, my family was already living on a homestead because of, other teachings and just seeing the way the world was going. And I wanted to prepare my kids for their future, just like anybody, who loves their children wants to see their kids prepared for their futures, right? I mean, this is just parenting 101. If you know the future is going to go in a certain direction, of course you're going to prepare your kids for that. And another word that's used in these books, in this Whispers from the Brighter World, Babaji calls people researchers. And in one of the messages, a few of them, he talks about people going and doing more research into this, right, to validate what he's saying in the physical world. Like there's news or whatever it is, history or, science or whatever you need to do to confirm what he's saying. And, I was one of the only people that was doing this. Like I didn't know that. I thought everybody was. Like I thought everybody wanted to dive deeper. And I mean, this is just, I'm scratching the surface of some of these things here. So I dove into the truth community as a big part of this to validate what these, messages were saying and what I was seeing already, because I was witnessing the world changing in 2001 and then all the way through, right? So by 2007, when I had this YouTube channel and my family and I had been living on our second homestead and we were working towards all these things, I thought it was this research project that was ultimately going to benefit other people in the heartfulness system. But I got negative feedback from so many people, like I couldn't believe it, right? Like I'm like, you're reading these whispers as well. I mean, some people quit over these messages and there was other things, but I was just following my heart, which is what the heartfulness system's about. And so I was amazed at the amount of pushback they ended up getting when this was being validated. These books were being celebrated and things within the mission, but very few people were taking them seriously, especially the stuff about the way the world was going to be in the future. So during this process, maybe around 2010, like any truther, like any person who does research in this field, you figure out that the UN is involved in some shady stuff, right? And at that same time, so this is maybe 2012, I think, when it happened, I realized that the heartfulness system, Sahaj Marg, heartfulness hadn't been, the heartfulness aspect hadn't been developed yet. But Sahaj Marg, the system of meditation, the natural path, had become an NGO of the UN. And so I thought it was my duty, because I had this information, this information about the UN and the negative aspects and how it has a bad reputation in so many countries around the world, that I should put it out there in terms of the, because this is a grassroots organization of volunteer people, the heartfulness system is. And so, we're all supposed to contribute. We all have, and it says over and over again in the whispers that everybody has gifts and abilities that they have to contribute to the collective, right? And that we all have something to offer. And I thought this is, maybe my thing, right? This research project my family and I were doing on the farm, the homestead, and this other thing, to do with truther stuff, and specifically with the UN. So I wrote to Master Charji, who was, undergoing real physical issues, and he wasn't in charge or wasn't the person, he had turned this over to somebody else. I don't know if you can hear that. My dog's playing with something on the floor. Dulcie, she's like a force of nature. And then, anyways, so I wrote to Master Charge, and he said, well, these are the people that are in charge of that. He referred me to them, these concerns that I had. And they were legitimate concerns, as you guys know, but they didn't see it that way. And part of my concerns were based in this letter by Babaji, who wrote to the UN. So the UN asked him to join. So he wrote a letter to Dr. K.C. Varadachari, who was a famous professor of religion and spirituality at some university. And he had been, important to training Master Charji in a lot of the religious histories and things like this. And so Babaji wrote a letter to K.C. Varadachari, and then he included the letter to the UN, and he commented about the UN's proposal. And then this was then published in a book of Babaji's letters. And he said this: there is a section in the UNO for world peace. They want to have a separate army well equipped to crush the power which attacks any country and uses the modern weapons. They sent to me a form for membership, and to help them in this cause, I have sent them a letter by expressing my views to this point. So it says, Shahjahanpur, UP, dated 8th July, 1957. Dear Sir, I am glad to receive your bulletin, and I pour forth my warm thanks for the awakening for peace created among our brethren of the world. The idea of peace common in all minds, though shattered by the self of the individual mind, is working on individualistic basis to gain one's own end on the account of the narrow-mindedness of people. To dissipate the idea of individual self and to work harmoniously for the common good is the demand of the time. The conference and meetings held for the purpose may only be like a spark to offer a temporary glow to the scattered fragment of peace. Their cries in the wilderness will not carry far on the path of success because of material agony of faith working at the bottom. What we therefore require at the present is only to improve the morals and to discipline the mind. We must learn how to create within the heart a feeling of universal love, which is surest remedy of all evils and can help to free us from the horrors of war. I perfectly agree with our good friend late Bernard Mallon when he expresses his faith to unite in the common search for happiness. Happiness, of course, is necessary to end all grief, but it is like the black wall of the scientists, which does not allow them to proceed further towards universal love. To come up to the level of real happiness, we must necessarily rise above ourselves, which is essential for the creation of atmosphere of universal love. That is the primary factor in the solution of the problem. India has ever since been in search of it. She did not encroach upon other countries for war and bloodshed, not for reason of her cowardice, but because she realized her pious duty towards humanity. They were happy in their homes in spite of the torturous incursions of their nations. These tortures were to them nothing but flowers sent by the Divine Master to coach them to proper steps necessary for the uplift of mankind individually and collectively. The seed of it is so deeply laid that still its branches bear blossoms, filling the air with the sweet fragrance of peace and happiness. It is so firmly rooted that even the worst tempest cannot uproot it. Such are the things necessary for the uplift of mankind, which everyone, Occidental or Oriental, must treat as a part of his duty. Unless the foundation of peace is made to rest on spiritual basis, no better prospects can be expected. It is but definite and certain that sooner or later we will have to adopt spiritual principles if we want to maintain our existence. If the material force can avert the incursions and attacks, bloodshed cannot be avoided because even then we have to apply force, causing thereby bloodshed on either side. He's saying there, if you apply force by armies, the UN, to countries that are using force, then you're still going to kill people and there's still going to be a war. Arrogance cannot be stopped by material force. It is only the spiritual force which can remove the causes of war from the minds of people. How to introduce these things among the masses, we are yet unfamiliar with. The accuracy of the mark is the next problem, and it is equally intricate. If my opinion were to be invited, I would lay down the simplest possible method as given below. Let all brothers and sisters sit daily at a fixed hour, individually at respective places, and meditate for about an hour, thinking all people of the world are growing peace, loving, and pious. This process, suggested not with exclusively spiritual motives, is highly efficacious in bringing about the desired results and weaving the destiny of the miserable millions. With prayer for success of your noble mission, yours sincerely, Ramchandra, President, Sri Ramchandra Mission, Shahjahanpur, UP. This is very typical Babaji language, and a lot of these things he's saying he's written in other books or said in talks and things. And what he's saying here, and I'm just going to sort of paraphrase because there's a lot here, but that by materialistic force and application and having some authoritative organization like the UN imposing its will, it's just going to lead to a different sort of war and all the things we know that the UN eventually did. And so he wrote this in 1957, and I reread this in, I don't know, 2012 or 13 when this stuff was happening, right, when I was doing research. And I realized he was, a very gentle way and a very collegial way, because it's a nice letter he's writing to whoever it is in the UN, but it is predicting what was going to happen with the UN. Like all these things that he's saying, again, it's very typical Babaji language. It might be harder for you to understand, but the people who are doing this meditation, many of them have been doing it longer than I have, would understand Babaji's language and understand that he was correcting the UN, correcting their course of action, and saying we first must cultivate inner peace through prayer and meditation. And if you got everyone in the world to meditate on peace and let all our brothers and sisters sit daily at a fixed hour, individually at our respective places, and meditate for about an hour, thinking that all people of the world are growing peace, loving, and pious. Very similar to the universal and 9 o'clock prayer of the heartfulness system. And so, when I reread this, and I was talking to these various people in charge of the heartfulness being a NGO of the United Nations, and that Babaji had a choice to join with the United Nations, and he said that your mission is going to fail because you're applying force instead of peace, right? You can't achieve peace through war. Very simply, right? And we know all the other things that have come of this because of the United Nations. And on the webpage, there used to be a webpage, I don't know if it still exists, they had an excerpt of this letter about him suggesting to the UN this thing I just read about everybody meditating for an hour. And they were using that as a reason for joining or becoming an NGO. And I said, well, that's just, that's not really what Babaji was saying in the letter. And the UN has this bad reputation. And so since it's supposed to be a brotherly organization, a brotherly, sisterly organization, a grassroots organization, I asked questions in letters like, did you, was there a message from Whispers of the Brighter World where Babaji said to be an NGO and reversed his position, or, Master Charji? What exactly happened so that this was reversed, that Babaji was asked and he said no, and then years later we became an NGO? And so they just didn't give me a straight answer. There's multiple people involved, various people I sent emails to and things like this. And basically what they were saying is, why are you asking this question, right? Why are you, you shouldn't even be asking this question. Well, it doesn't really matter. You just, have faith or whatever it was. And I'm like, well, yeah, all right. But why did this happen? Just explain the series of events that led to this. Because the other piece to this is, it's been said over and over again that the Sahaj Marg system, heartfulness system, should never be political. I mean, this has been stressed over and over again. It's open to all. So if if one group, one political party comes in and one ideology comes in, then the opposite people won't feel comfortable joining or participating, right? They'll say, oh, that's a Republican or Democrat or whatever it is in India or Europe, right? And so it should never be political. It should never be liberal or conservative or any of these divisive type of ideologies that people have. And I understand that from the truther perspective. The master of the system can't go full truther, right? Or the organization, because that would disclude people who didn't believe in that. So I'm, completely cool with that. I know that that's how it has to be. Makes sense to me. But my question, which I know all of you are going to agree with, why join the UN then? Because that's the most political organization, and it's very controversial. And the UN has bad approval ratings in so many countries. And the things that UN has participated in, I mean, you look at this movie Whistleblower, which I referenced in my letters, which is documentation of the UN and private security companies, peacekeepers taking women out of Kosovo and trafficking them, young women, like they were human trafficking people. And that's been documented by mainstream media. It's not like some crazy truther theory, but it's more than just one instance. This has happened over and over again. And so my point was, if we're going to keep this a neutral organization, then you can't join the UN. Like, this is a problem. I hope you can see this. At least I want to bring this to your attention. And they just wouldn't acknowledge that I had a valid point, right? That there was veracity to my argument. Is that the right word? Veracity? I'm not sure. Who else? That there was legitimacy to my argument. That's all I cared about, right? At least you can see my perspective, and then maybe this will change things in the future. But the way it played out, I mean, there was this one person who was, in charge. He was the secretary of the mission at the time, somebody who I got along with fine. But he said I was being too idealistic, which then things started to get nasty, because I'm like, well, then what am I doing here? And it was basically implied to me that I was taking the literature and the teachings of the system too literally. Like, I was believing in the books and these whispers messages. And I'm like, well, then why put them out there if you're not standing by these things, right? Why put them out there? Like, why put these, ideals out there? If you're going to say books are books and real life is real life, then don't put the books out, right? Like, I don't care. I'm not, I'm kind of a slacker, but I'm trying to live up to the standards set by the philosophy and the mission, right? And so this thing got into that kind of realm. And basically how it ended was I was viewed as a problem, and they never understood or acknowledged my point of view. In terms of, it wasn't my point of view. It was, I'm a person with something to offer, a person who can contribute something, a different perspective, like what you see here on this YouTube channel. And my understanding of the UN came out of these, in part, these whispers messages and things that were being put out there. And my doing research, which was suggested in the whispers messages. And when I brought this information back to the group, I was, shut down and rejected. So that kind of sucked, right? But I was okay with it because I was like, I realized that the UN was barely a presence. And I found this video where this guy from the UN, I had to take a break for dinner. It's a long narrative. I'm a little bit out of breath. I just went outside. It's late and made sure that chicks, we have 10 new chicks. It's like freezing rain. And I want to make sure they were in the coop. My wife usually attends to the chickens, but she was sick. So anyways, I want to finish this thing up. So I want to get back to this story with this guy from the UN and Master Chargy. But first I wanted to say that the heartfulness system works. This is one of the reasons why this is important to me, what was happening with the UN thing, is because of my, love for and appreciation and gratitude for the heartfulness system, specifically around the transmission and the cleaning. And then there's the organizational part, which always is difficult for me. I'm not a joiner, right? I'm not a person that wants to be a part of organizations. I've never held jobs for a very long time. And, it's hard for me to sustain relationships and things like this. I'm a loner by nature, right? And, you can see with what my, ability to recognize patterns and whatever things I have going on in terms of seeing things, seeing inconsistencies or issues or whatever, it's hard for me to stick with things. I see problems, systemic problems, and I just don't want to be a part of it. But in terms of these people I'm talking about, these fellow practitioners of the these brother practitioners of the heartfulness system, these guys that I was dealing with to do with the UN, they've done a lot of great work and service for the heartfulness system. It isn't like they're just, I'm presenting it like these guys are part of the controlling system and they've been compromised by the UN or something, because the UN has basically little to no influence over the heartfulness system. And I'll get to that when I tell the story about this guy who showed up for the UN. There's like 2 million NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that have an association with the UN. And it's the way the UN gets their claws into them. And I'll explain how it works. But it's not like some overwhelming presence. Like, I didn't even know for 3 years that, the heartfulness system was an NGO. And it was only because of me stumbling on it on the heartfulness website, the Sajmark website, that I found out or whatever. It wasn't like you'd walk around the ashrams and you'd see UN stuff everywhere. You just, it was something that they were hoping to bring more people in. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But these guys I was dealing with had done substantial work for the heartfulness system. The main guy was secretary of the mission, and he owned a hotel, and he would use his spare time. He made a lot of money, and he lived in Texas. He made a lot of money with the hotel, donated probably hundreds of thousands of dollars or more of his own money, and he volunteered his time, oversaw projects, building ashrams. I mean, he just did all this volunteer work that went with this. It's one of the biggest volunteer organizations in the world, and he did substantial work for years and years and years. Somebody who I like and get along with. He's also a preceptor and trainer in the mission, which he gave lots of sittings and things. And he had people over his house, in terms of staying at his house for gatherings and all kinds of things. So he had done substantial work, as did all these other guys. Many of them were wealthy and donated lots of money. Daji Kamlesh Patel, aside from doing all the spiritual work he's done over the years, he's donated money and bought land and spent all this time and energy keeping the organization running even before he was the master of the system. And so, I appreciate all that, and I've benefited from this personally. I've gone to these ashrams. I wasn't in a position to donate money and do very much work, and was able to go to these ashrams and things. And I'm always very appreciative of people who have given generously of their time and money, people who volunteer at gatherings, cooking meals 16 hours a day, cooking, meals for, 30,000 people and things in the hot Indian sun. I went to a gathering in Hyderabad, and it was 110 degrees out, and you had people cooking meals all day and things so that everyone could eat at the gathering, right? Just, wonderful service. And so I'm always very appreciative of the service that brothers and sisters in the mission give and things. And a lot of it is positive, right? So this UN thing was a singular thing, in terms of the overall scope of what was going on in the mission, right? And I understood that. But it was frustrating on a level for a couple of reasons, because I knew that it would become a problem, like now, in terms of truthers who are now coming to the system, many coming through my YouTube videos, and then they see there's an association with the UN, and they're going to get bummed out, right? And I knew that would happen. Of course, I never knew, my YouTube channel, I wasn't doing it like a full-time job. And so I never thought that would develop the way it is, and I never thought I would be a part of this. But I knew eventually there'd be people coming in from the truth community, and there already are. There already were people who understood these narratives, and we talked, and they said, yeah, they had a problem with the UN thing as well. So it was already, an issue, and so it needed to be addressed. At least they needed to be aware of this, liability. Joining the UN was against the, non-politicalization of the heartfulness system. And so there was it went against the teachings and the principles of the mission. And so it needed to be addressed. And the way that they went about it sucked, right? The way that they handled me, the way that they, really didn't make it clear. And they tried to delegitimize, my concerns was a problem. Like that, it's like anything else. These were people who did good work, volunteer work, but they had issues. Sometimes they, got into it with other people. There's some arrogance there or whatever, lack of, sensitivity. And there was a problem with it, which I'll get into in just a moment, in terms of, this story. The real problem, what ended up being the problem for me, was not so much the UN, because I understood what happened. Finally, I put the pieces together, because I do that kind of thing, right? I'm able to, see the big picture, and I figured out the story. And I saw this video. So it was a video where there was this UN representative, and he showed up at a gathering and gave a talk with Master Charji, who followed it up with a talk. And what was happening was there's these Millennium Development Goals, and I've talked about this. And, this was very helpful, because I went in and did deeper research than I usually would to figure all this stuff out. And it paid dividends when the UN invaded Gaddafi, right? When America and the UN destroyed Libya, or, they destroyed the Libyan government and murdered Gaddafi, because he had accomplished all these UN development goals. And so I think there were 8 goals. It was like poverty and education and treatment of women, and forming PPPs, which are private and public partnerships, governmental and private partnerships, all of which Gaddafi did. And these Millennium Goals were for developing nations, and they were supposed to be accomplished by like 2015. Gaddafi had already accomplished them by like 2009. And what they would do is they would form these NGOs, which was, for like the heartfulness system, for example, the people that go to the heartfulness system trust the, master and trust the organization. And so when you form an NGO, then now the organization and the leader of the organization is basically endorsing the UN, right? And so that trust that is formed in the organization, because these might be like, some sort of volunteer health organization or, something like that, who knows what, serving the local community, or a spiritual organization or some sort of temple or religion. And the people would really trust that, organization. Now they would trust the UN because the organization's vouching for it. And so this guy got up and he presented the Millennium Development Goals to a group of practitioners at the system. And then Master Chargy got up and gave a talk, and he was like, well, we're not as big an organization as the UN, but he was like almost defensive. He was definitely defensive. And he had like a little bit of an edge and an attitude. And I think he got sort of, he could see that the guy was working their system and presenting their agenda, right? And so like I knew then that he wasn't happy about the UN thing. Like there was some element that, clearly whoever the people were that made the arrangement really, they didn't really have his blessing on this or whatever. He might have said, go ahead and do it or whatever, but he really wasn't psyched about it. I could tell that he was negative about it. And then I put together the rest of the story, and what had happened was that Master Chargy opened a school, and it's, the school is charged with this spiritual energy, which is the centerpiece of it. And he brought in people from lower castes in India. I mean, he was, pulling people out of their poverty. I explained this before. There were people who were living free at the ashram, people who were, really poor that would normally live in huts and abject poverty. And their kids would go to this high-level school, a school that had kids from America and Europe and Russia. I mean, all kinds of, it was an international school. And he had to choose a couple of education programs, like an honors program, which he picked a Cambridge program because he had gone to a Cambridge school when he was a young person. He liked that program. And he said that he wanted to develop like, heartfulness-based education, but they needed something that was accredited, because in India, if the school wasn't accredited, no one would go to it because there's such a high level of competition, and like he had to make it mainstream because of the nature of the system there. And so, that was just what had to happen. And he picked the Cambridge model. Maybe it was the Oxford, I don't know. It's not, really important to this video, but it was one of those, English models. And then for the regular academics, the non-honors program, he picked the UN UNESCO program because it's a very popular program, and it was, established and accredited. And so, I don't really know what kind of a program it is, but I know a lot of the educational programs in India are so bad. Like they teach to the test where they give the students the questions, and they have the students memorize the questions, and then they have them memorize the answers, but don't teach them like why. I mean, it's that bad, the educational system. I talked to some teachers and things. So this school was way above the normal, average school in India. And from that, there were some people who dealt with the UN in some way in their private businesses. And there is like I said, a NGO, a non-governmental organization, for every like 400 or 600 people. Back then it was for every 400 people in India. And being an NGO is sort of a badge of honor for an organization. And so some of these guys who were, they had positions, administrative positions in this volunteer organization, pushed it through, and everyone sort of agreed with it. And, Heartfulness became an NGO. So it was not great, but it was not that big a deal. It wasn't something I was concerned about. And like I said, Babaji and the masters of the system has overwhelming spiritual power, divine power that is much greater than anything that the UN could muster. And this organization and the heartfulness movement, I believe is the solution given by God for this period of time. And it's going to outlast the UN. Like the UN's going to disappear in the next, I don't know, couple of 100 years. And maybe there might be some good reason for it down the road. There might be something that helps, helps the system in some way. The UN, when the UN, there's things that the UN does that are actually good. It's not like it's all evil. And we know about the bad things, but there's things at the UN that does good, and there's good people that are a part of the UN. So it's not like, a slam dunk that it's horrible across the board like people in the truth community like to think with black and white thinking. And so I'm like fine with the UN part. Like, all right, it's not great and, whatever. It is what it is, and I've benefited so much from the heartfulness system, and it didn't, contaminate the system or anything like this. And it's just something that was kind of aggravating. But the thing that bothered me was that I could see that this point of view, the truther point of view, where you confront authority and you question the official story, was like not appreciated at all. In fact, they did the kinds of things, the way they treated me is the way that all of us really feel, like the delegitimize, like, oh, that's not, you shouldn't even think that way. What's wrong? Like I was some sort of, crazy person or something. And so like that was a little bit troublesome, right? And that's something that sort of, stuck with me because I get over things. Like I don't hold on to things. I've always been this way, but with the heartfulness system and the cleaning, I just, I don't stress over things. I was upset for a couple of days here or there, but in the end, I just was over it. It was just that aspect of it, because I felt that was, fundamentally dishonest, especially because I was following, the teachings that Babaji had laid down in Whispers of the Brighter World and his book Reality at Dawn and other books and other, things that were prophecies and things. And just the, things I read earlier in this video. And Babaji at the end of that, 2001 September 13th message said, wake up if you're not yet awoken. He gave this order to wake up, and I woke up, right? I was already awake, but I woke up more, and I did all this research, and I knew it had value. And, I grew up in a family where we used to cut each other down. And you can see that I can be, in terms of name calling or insulting, in ways that, because I grew up in Connecticut and that area, New York and Connecticut and New Jersey and, Boston, Massachusetts, it's a rough area in terms of the way people treat each other and tease each other and give everybody a hard time. And so insults and things, they're just not, the insults that I've heard just don't compare to what, like I get on the internet. And most of those are kind of funny anyway. And so this treatment wasn't like, so personally offensive. Like I've been, in worse situations and difficult situations and things like that. But what was bad about it was treating an ideology that came from my spiritual practice and this process I went through where I was following my heart. I was doing what you're supposed to do in the heartfulness system. I was following my spiritual path, and I was doing, what I considered quality work and research. And when I presented this information, they dismissed me and rejected me and the information. And what they were doing was rejecting the heartfulness, the essence of the heartfulness system itself. And they were supposed to be, not doing that. And so that stuck with me a little bit. And, I carried that forward because, I let go of the UN thing, and I just said, all right, and whenever I heard about the UN or they made an announcement about one of these international UN days, even now, it stings a little bit, slightly. It's just a little bit of a reminder of that, thing, because it wasn't a pleasant thing to go through. But it didn't diminish the, benefits I was receiving from the heartfulness system and, the other work that these people had done to support and promote the system in terms of, all the, work I mentioned before in this video about these, volunteer services and money that they had donated, sittings they had given, and these things. And the other piece to this, I was looked at as like a problem person after that. And even before that, maybe a little bit. That I was judged in some way, that I wasn't a good, practitioner of the system, and I wasn't fulfilling my duties and things like that. Because, my family had lived in poverty because of the homestead things and just, all this stuff. And so there was ways that I was viewed And there were some other things that happened, the way that my, first marriage had happened and things, and which really had more to do with my ex, but it was like somehow I was blamed. I often get blamed for stuff that I didn't do at all, and I just like whatever. Like I like, and that happened a lot more as this rolled on. So the perception of me as a person was not really good, even though I was doing my best to be of service and contribute something. But it was rejected, which is always sucky, right? When you offer something and with your heart and you offer something in terms of your service and people like crap all over it, right? And then, look at you like you're some sort of a problem, that always sucks, right? So, but I brushed it off and, I moved on. So about a year and a half later, my family came back to India for an extended sort of vacation and spiritual retreat there that lasted, we were in and out of the country for about 3 years. And, our homestead had collapsed and my marriage was just a nightmare, stuff with my ex. And I'm not, that's a whole nother story. But I've talked about some of those things, right? And, it was like a horror show. And, with the homestead collapsing and just the difficulties, and there was just a lot of failure with it. And, we had tried all these things and we were working to have some sort of intergenerational family farm. And it was just sort of backed against the wall and had multiple failures. And I was trying to get the publication company going. I had written the book, The Choice, and all these things. But it was just, things would be going good and it looked like the doors were opening up and then they just sort of slam into my face, over and over again. And so, we were basically limping into India with this idea that, doing what we were doing without community. And again, having like-minded people. And we had talked to people and exchanged emails with people from all over the world that were interested in what we were doing. But it was a small, sort of subgroup of all the normal people, like the normies that did the heartfulness system. But a lot of them were inspired and, this Gurukulam idea I talked about earlier, a school on a farm and all these things. And so I just wanted to go to India and just present this information and have it be like, well, either you're going to keep on doing this or, do something else or whatever, right? Like, is this of value to the system? Because I had already gone through the thing with the UN like a couple years earlier or whatever, in terms of the time frame. And so I just wanted to sit down with Master Charji, right? Or, more importantly, Daji, who was going to be the master in about a year or so, because Charji had poor health, and just say, is there a future for this? There's something that could be done here in terms of a project like this, which would involve more people and things like this, more support and the rest of it. And the information, because I had all this information on like food forests and agricultural things and farming things and all these skills that had been lost, tools and skills and things. Because when Babaji said in that Whispers from the Brighter World that people have to work with their hands in the future, well, all of those skills had been lost and my family and I were reclaiming them. And I wanted to pass on this information and our experience on the homestead and the truther stuff to the mission. It was quite an extensive research project. And you can see I have a good memory and I have a good way of conceptualizing these things and presenting them. So I thought I had this gift to give, and I was hoping it would be received, even though there was a little bit of skepticism and doubt, right? Because of previous, instances. And again, I appreciate the mission and the organization of the system as mostly being a good thing. But also there was this idea that everyone has something to share, a gift to give. And, mine was rejected. Like it was, which sucked. I mean, it didn't feel great. But it wasn't like, that made the transmission or the cleaning not work. I was still evolving spiritually. The system was still working for me. And I loved the, meditation and the cleaning and the sittings and all this stuff. But, everyone wants to participate in the system. And Master Charji, his big thing was work, because he worked all the time, and he was somebody who had this incredible work ethic, and his contribution in the system was just a massive amount of work that he had done over the years. And so that was something that was, valued. But anyways, so a year and a half went by, we returned to India, and we went and met somebody who was a, woman from a Western country, let's just put it this way, who was working a lot with Dodgy. And she brought up the UN thing. And I didn't really want to talk about it because I just, when I'm over something and I can't change it, I just, stop talking about it because it's over. You see that with issues, things happen in the truth community and there's nothing you can do about it. It's happened, it's over, whatever. I might reference it or something. But it's something that bums me out. I don't talk about it because, why think about something and talk about something that's just going to bring you down, that you can't control and can't change because it's in the past. But this woman sort of drew us out. And she said that there was a guy who used to work for the UN and he had said all the same things that I had said, or, all these things, right? And so she, got me to got us to talking about it. And, and I thought, all right, this person seems to be on our side or whatever. And, it was over. Like, I didn't think that they were going to stop being an NGO, and I was just moving on. And she said Dodgy already thought that the UN wasn't doing anything for the, system. And so maybe he was opening to severing the NGO, or at least just not dealing with it at all. She said these things that, made me feel hopeful. But then she went to talk to Dodgy, and my understanding of it is, like, I wasn't there, but as the events unfolded, she basically sold us out, and mostly me. Like, disparaged us and, said I was still clinging to this or whatever, that I was negative or whatever it was, right? And, which wasn't cool because I didn't want to talk about it, and she pulled it out. And then I heard all these sort of bad things about this person, someone who causes a lot of drama and does these sorts of things. And, even though it's a spiritual organization, there's still a lot of these types of people. It's just, it's inevitable. And, and as I saw the person, I realized she wasn't that great. Well, what happened was after that, we got a chance to sit down and have a meeting with Dodgy, and I wanted to present all this information and say, this is all this research project and things. And it was like a big deal. And so, it was me, my ex, and our 4 kids, and everybody got dressed up. And there was this young German girl. She's like 23 or something like this, just like this sort of just happy-go-lucky, great person. And everyone in my family just loved her. She was like a member of the family. And she bought these flowers. In India, they have these flowers that they weave in their hair, and the women weave into their hair. And she did that for all the girls, right? And so we're all dressed up, and like we're going over to meet Dodgy. And we get there, and the guy who was sort of in charge of the UN thing, who I hadn't seen in, probably since we had that sort of unpleasant exchange, he was there. And, he was nice, and he offered us, I don't know, some sort of drink and maybe some sort of cake or something. But it was a little bit uncomfortable because we hadn't seen each other. I was over it, but it was still just tension. And then there was a couple there that was in my original center, and they had, drama with the preceptor who started me, who I was, very fond of and loyal to. And we had some, negative exchanges that came from their end, but they had, a negative opinion of me. And the wife particularly had said some negative things about me, which I knew about. And it was uncomfortable, and there had been just some tension there. And like I was over it, but these were the worst 3 people in the whole, in the whole organization of, a couple 100,000 that could have been there, right? Because then I was like, this isn't an accident. And then when Dodgy came in, there was just all this tension, and usually he has, he had this spiritual condition, and he was still not the master of the system. He was really stressed out and going through, all of these changes spiritually because he was being prepared to be the master. There was all this internal work that was being done. And like I said, he was reading these diaries of Master Charji, which I read a couple of years ago. And they were rough. Like, they were rough to get through. They were really, heartbreaking in ways, and just the way he was treated. And, just knowing that this person that you would never think had these like insecurities and weaknesses. And there's times that he was just so desperate and depressed and, just at being attacked all the time and all the things he was going through. And so it was a rough read. Like, I'll never read that book again. Like I did it once, and, I was like hurt or angry. Hurt for him and angry. And there's people that And I was reading this other book, so I had, extra information. So I was, going through this time period of these letters that he had and this exchange of letters and, things that he was writing. And I knew some of these people. Like I knew these people, and I knew that, now I knew some of the crap that they put him through, some brutal stuff, right? So it was, it was almost like a personal thing I went through. And so Dodgy came in there, and sometimes a spiritual master will criticize you in a way or do something, and it evokes a cleaning, which is what ended up happening. And this interaction ended up being a complete blessing. Like everything that's happening now in my life and the YouTube channel and all these things have come from this interaction. And this is something that I'm very grateful for. And like I said, for somebody who's in a very blissful spiritual condition to come down and, see something that needs to be cleaned or something that has to change is really a true gift. But back then, like when it was happening, I didn't think that at all. So I started to talk about some of the things that I wanted to present about, things that we had learned on the homestead and all the research I had done about, whatever kind of farming, food forests and things like this and permaculture. And I should say that, nice German girl that was like a part of our family, I talked to her about some of these things, and she was into learning about permaculture. She had already done some research, and when she was going back home, she was from, I think, actually Austria, which is basically, part of Germany. And she was going to visit this guy, Sepp Holzer, who was one of the famous, persons who started permaculture. I mean, he has this wonderful farm, these, wonderful things that he's done, like almost miraculous agricultural masterpieces, right? And so I had talked to a few people, and they were, it seemed like there was an audience for this. And people who are, a bunch of people read my book. I showed Master Chargy my book, and a bunch of people like wanted to buy it because he looked at it very thoroughly. And I have pictures of that I posted in other videos. And he blessed it. He put his hand on it and things, the choice. And all these people bought it and read it, and some of them were into it. And so I thought that there was like going to be an opening up of things, right? That there was people that were going to be interested in this research project that I had done, my family had done. And so I was kind of feeling psyched about it, right? I was feeling pretty upbeat. And then, Dodgy just sort of lit into us, and mostly me. And he talked about how, we did the farm too soon. And I was like, well, the things that are being said and predictions that are in the system, there's all, and I didn't get the chance to say any of these things. And he said we did it with not enough resources and money and things like this, which I'll come back to because that's important. And he said all these other things, and a lot of things weren't true. They weren't based in, truth. And he was basically saying that this path that had unfolded and this spiritual thing that we had gone through wasn't accurate, right? We had made mistakes, and mostly it was directed at me. And so, and then he just popped up and stood up and didn't give me a chance to speak. And, and I was like, I already knew it had gone south, and it was just a complete bummer. And so that's what really stung, because not just on an ego level, but on a spiritual level, I had felt like, and I reviewed it. I went through it and, every major decision that I made and things like this. And there was only one choice every time, one legitimate choice, which was the path of my soul, following my heart in the system. And it just, went that way, right? And so to be invalidated by the, future master of the system, and again, he was going through things, and it ended up being, like I said, a blessing and an epic cleaning. And I had this spiritual experience that I considered a shruti, which is a divine message. I was in a group meditation in Massachusetts when my family lived there. And I immediately went into like a deep state of meditation, like this overwhelming, experience. And I had this, like, it sounded like a dynamo in my ears. And I was just like, it was like if something was just coming into my system, like I was downloading a program from this, transmission. And it was this profound experience. And I had read about these things called shrutis, which means to hear in Sanskrit. And somebody, a spiritual person, is given this program. And like afterwards, I immediately had this idea for this counseling business because I was working with sex offenders. And I wrote this workbook called Transforming Abuse, A Soul-Driven Existence. And I was, I developed, and I'd never been on the internet. Like I just had remedial, I guess I'd been on the internet just a little bit, but I really did know much about computers, and I taught myself PowerPoint and what's the front page, and I put together a PowerPoint presentation which I delivered. I went to these various health, they have these sort of health wellness type of booths and things. I took out booths and gave presentation and things, and I built a website. Like I didn't, I just wrote a book, built a like all these things. Just I was able to teach myself, and and the next step after Shruti Counseling, because it didn't work out for various reasons, it wasn't a successful business. But then the next step was Pockets of the Future, and I had this idea of Pockets of the Future, and so all of that came from this spiritual experience. And so did our farming, and so did some of these other things, right? And there was this turning point where my family came into some money, and my ex wanted to farm and homestead and said that the window for this opportunity was closing, and I wanted to put the money into this business model, which ended up being very successful in terms of what I'm doing now, right? But she was very hell-bent on the homestead starting and putting the money and the resources and the time into doing that. Then we got the cows and we did all these other things. And so, my counseling business failed because of that, right? Because, and other reasons, it wasn't just that. But then I had the idea of Pockets of the Future, which was creating this YouTube channel, and YouTube was coming about. And, right, I had this vision, and I had this visionary personality, I wanted to do a farm. It wasn't like we weren't going to do a farm. But first I wanted to be able to financially sustain it. And so I wanted to get the business up first, a business to support the farm. But my ex was adamant, and she had this perfectionistic type of, she was very difficult in this way. And she had been an abusive survivor and somebody who had, self-abused and attempted suicide and things like this. And when we had arguments, like I would have to hide all the knives, and she would, get into these states, psychotic states or whatever it was, and blame me for them. I mean, even if I said something, you get into an argument, you might say something mean or whatever it is, which, I wasn't above doing, and I had force in my system and things, and I could say mean things, so I contributed to it. But it's like when you have normal arguments with people, and it just stays at a level 2 or 3, but they always ended up going 10 for her, and she would get self-abusive in these things, and it was just a nightmare. It would last sometimes weeks. And so, because of that, I ended up having to go along with things not to trigger her, right? And this was what happened. So I wanted to do this, I wanted to get the financial end of our family going first. And so when Daji criticized, us for not being financially sustainable by doing the farm, and these farms are very expensive, and we could never get above water and things, and we kept on doing more and more things, and that was, instead of putting energy into bringing in resources and things, which was, never my desire. It was never my plan, but just to keep the peace. And, dealing with somebody who has that type of issues, right, is a complete drain and a nightmare. And it went on for years, and I'm minimizing the crap out of it. Like, I don't want to make that the central part of this story, but it's something that I went through that was, traumatic. It was traumatic for the whole family. It was a nightmare. And so I'm saying that because one of the great things that came out of the meeting is my ex couldn't, because of, her psychological configuration, couldn't blame Daji. And because of her own personal weaknesses, couldn't take any personal responsibility herself. And so there was only one person left to blame, and it was me, right? After this, meeting and just this frustration, right? And what happened was she rearranged the story to say that it was all my idea, all of it, even though she's the one who was insistent on doing the farm before securing the financial resources, which is one of the things that Daji criticized us about, right? And, a lot of other things. And so she began telling everybody that I was mentally ill, like, even though, like, I had gone through all these things. I went through this, I want to get into that right now, but I had to make a decision of whether, it was such a difficult circumstance, but because of the kids and, all the other factors, I realized I was trapped. Like, there was no way out of it, and I had to make the best of it. And I had to be as nice and loving as possible just to, minimize the drama and all of it, And I was aware of the effects of childhood abuse that, somebody like that suffers, and the effects, the after effects. And I try to minimize those as much as possible and just, eat it. Like, sometimes you just gotta eat things, right? You just have to fucking, there's nothing you could do about it. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't sell out, I didn't complain about it and things. I just made the best of it. And so, and there's loyalty is a big thing for me. And I just said, all right, this is, there's no choice. You just got to go through this and be positive, be grateful for whatever, right? Maybe they'll at some point be at the end of it. But so this interaction with Dodgy, there was just this break in the relationship, which was, it was a blessing in so many ways. When that, getting free from that situation, and I wasn't the one who did it either. Like, I didn't turn or whatever. I didn't, blame her or whatever, right? And so, but we left the meeting, and I was just completely bummed because I felt like I got set up by God, right? Like, I felt like I followed the path that God laid down for me, and the Shruti and all these things in the family, and then the door just slammed, and now, my marriage was crumbling, and we had this idea of an intergenerational family farm, and I had to reinvent family life. And as things unfolded, there was all this drama, and things just got worse and worse. So for 3 days, I just was like, I'm done. I'm done with this system. I just, I wasn't necessarily mad at Dodgy for what happened because I just wanted a yes or no answer, because it was always, there was just always something was going to go our way, and it didn't. Things would open up for a little while and the door would close. And it was just, in a way, it put the whole situation out of its misery. So it ended up being a blessing, and even in the initial part. But I wasn't psyched. I wasn't happy at the way he handled it, and, it was just a sucky interaction. But like I said, it turned out to be a blessing, but then it wasn't. And so I was just like, I'm done. I'm not doing the heartfulness thing. And so I, kind of quit, but I would just fall into meditation naturally, or I would just start doing the cleaning, and, I missed the 9 o'clock prayer and things. So for 2 or 3 days, I was just, really bummed, and my ex was turning on me and saying things about me, and just, just all of it, right? She came up with this realization of that I was crazy and why everything was my fault and all these things, which was, again, a blessing, like a mega blessing, because from that point on, it was basically over. Things just, it took a couple of years for it to be completely over, or, another, I don't know, 6 months before she left or whatever. But, it was that, there was just a break in the relationship, and, that was the, the albatross that was holding all this stuff back, right? And I was somebody who had just struggled finding my place in the world. I, went through this, what's called a Rahu period, which is a difficult period, like a dark planet in the Vedic astrology, from the time I was 10 till the time I was 28. And that's when I found heartfulness. And then everything was opening up. I went back and got my, bachelor's degree, and then went back and got my master's degree. And, I was having success writing books and doing these things, but it wasn't, being successful commercially. And I was being blocked in these ways. And we have somebody who was undermining everything, because there's people who, maybe hate themselves so much, and they're so twisted up on the inside, they can make it look like they're working and they're helping accomplish something, but they're really sabotaging and undermining everything. And, at the end of the day, they know it's going to fail, and they want to make it look like they did everything possible to make the thing succeed, but they're really setting somebody else to be the fall guy. And that's what I was living with. And, at so many levels, just a twisted nightmare, personality and things. But like I said, we had this plan. This was intergenerational family farm. We were going to get a big piece of land. We already had a small homestead, and we were going to have, give our kids the opportunity to build houses there. And so there would be this family support system, and we would grow our food, and we would share work and labor and all these things. And, there'd be homeschooling and all kinds of great things. It was a vision, and that just collapsed. And now my kids were interacting with very mainstream kids, even though they grew up on a farm, and they wanted cell phones now, and they wanted to be on social media, and they wanted to do normal things, and they didn't want any part of, these other things that we had been doing with them, right? And so everything fell apart, and now I had to reinvent, and because we had put so much into Homestead and this vision, like I was behind the eight ball. Now, I had to get my kids into school and do things and change things in terms of all of it, right? They were getting ready to graduate homeschooling and prepare them for adult life and, reinvent everything and now have a more mainstream lifestyle. And I was just wiped. I felt bad all the time. I was angry. And it brought up this like bitterness and anger that I had towards God from a past existence, which was the real blessing of this thing. And I didn't understand it then. It was a real poison in my system. It was preventing my spiritual growth and my material success, as well as this relationship and all these things, which was a part of it. And so all these things, like I was getting demonized and, I was being sold out and, my reputation was getting like slandered in the mission, right? This, organization and, all these things. And, and it was just overwhelming stress, and my ex just left for America, leaving me with the kids. And it was a, difficult time for them because they were going through things and cleaning and all this stuff, right? And I was left to deal with all these things on my own, and I was just like, there was this, a young Indian doctor, a woman from America that my family knew. She was like 25 or something, a nice girl. And she walked up to me one day and said, "Are you all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, why? What are you talking about?" She goes, "You just look gray and you're like bent over, like you can barely, I'm like, "Yeah, I had no idea what I looked like." But that was like, I was just, I got really sick. My son got dengue fever, and I was sick for like 2 months with a fever. And I came up with this, weird diagnosis. At first, I was pretty sure I had TB, but I went and got tested. And it was just like some kind of miracle because I went to bed thinking I had TB, and I woke up the next day feeling a lot better. And the tests came up with this kind of weird diagnosis that people get if they're in hospitals, something that people usually get when they're in a hospital. And I, was sick and weak for 3 months. And then my ex left, and, I was trying to pick up the pieces and make a plan for, reinvent my family life and the things with the kids and all that stuff. And during this process, so right after like a month or so after this interaction with Dodgy, Master Chargy died, which is a sad thing. It was just there's just this overwhelming sadness in the ashram area, and just, it was a, complete bummer, right? It was just this great person, and he has, physical suffering and things, and, I was happy that he was able to transcend to a higher level of consciousness, but it was a bummer for all of us. And then a month later, my mom died, and then, I made this video on Michelle Obama, and my YouTube channel took off. That's when Pockets of the Future just started to get noticed. Like all those things happened right after, and my marriage was ending, and, we went through this visa crisis, which was, just a unbelievable stressful thing. And then my family and I went to Sri Lanka, and my ex decided to buy a plane ticket and go back to the States and left us alone in India, which is, I'm being mild about that, right? And so, I went through this process for the next, I don't know, must have been almost a year, where I just was, there was a lot of anger I had towards God and frustration and just this bitterness. I could feel this bitterness finally. And I did these 3 group meditations a day, and I did, individual sittings with trainers and preceptors that lived near our flat. And I was just, threw myself into the heartfulness practice because Daji actually suggested this. He had said, if you're going through a tough cleaning, you can get sittings every day if you want. And so I was doing meditation like, maybe 3-4 times a day, and, working on the YouTube channel and, trying to, deal with my kids' future and set up something for us when we got back to America. And like this bitterness just got cleaned out. Like just one day it just was gone. And I can't describe how happy I was and how like it just opened everything up. It was just this miracle, which I attribute to all these things that happened that were bad, that, I had to go through these things, these, whatever it was, these difficulties. And my YouTube videos just got better. I was lighter, and, just my life was opening up in different ways. And it was like I was making more serotonin. Like everything was better. Like I was just a new person. Like I had been carrying around this bitterness. And I traced it back to a life 5,000 years ago from the Mahabharata, where this, I was a character in this thing. I got this, bitterness came from that. And then there was these subsequent lives where I developed this, just this frustration and negativity towards God because of things that had happened. And when that was cleaned out, like I realized the greatness of the heartfulness system. Like I was like, no matter what I go through in the future, this is a great system, and like it's such a blessing. Like if that's the only thing that happened to me in this entire lifetime, this would be an incredible like blessing and a success. And there's just been other things, right, from the heartfulness meditation. And it was, I always knew it worked and I always loved it. And, I had these big experiences before and things. But this was something that was just like, all right, this is so great. And so all these negative things that happen, all the drama that's unfolding, or Dodgy saying this stuff about masks. And, it was, for those of you who heard it, was a bummer. Right? I'm not going to repeat this stuff, but the things he said were anti-truther. And I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that even though there's those things I read, right, those whispers of the brighter world, and these predictions and just, a definition of the money power and the structure, even though they don't want to demonize anybody, even though they're not trying to ostracize anybody, because anybody can come to the heartfulness system and benefit. Anybody in the controlling system, anybody in the world, no matter how bad a person they are, the heartfulness system offers this ability to change and transform yourself and clean away your grossness. And there's been some horrible people. My namesake, St. Paul, persecuted Christians, right? And he became this, iconic figure in the Christian tradition. And so there's epic turnarounds that people have, and the heartfulness system is open to that, right? But like I was saying, even though there's this, all this literature and all this information in the heartfulness dogma, for lack of a better word, that there is just they don't understand, I guess Dodgy included, the truther stuff. They don't understand any of these positions. And so I've been frustrated with this stuff myself. And, I had these issues. I was going to tell more of the story about when I was getting harassed for the YouTube channel a little bit or whatever it was. It was a small thing. It was just irritating, but whatever. But the reason why, like, I would never quit, not just because, the first part is what I just said about the cleaning. But the other part is that the system, why should I quit because somebody else, bums me out, right? Why should I let somebody else rob me of this opportunity, of this, complete blessing that the heartfulness system is? Like I'm, as much of a part of the organization as anybody else. The master of the system has specific duties, and the system doesn't function without a living master acting as a main conduit for this transmission of flow through. And so, it needs this person. It needs this spiritual essence at the helm of the system. And so, yeah, they have a little bit more ownership. But Dodgy himself said at a gathering, this gathering I attended in Hyderabad, he said a great thing when he said that he was going to thank all the volunteers, all these volunteers who set up tents and were cleaning up and making food. Tremendous amount of work. People volunteering and working 10 hours a day, 16 hours a day. For a period of time before the gathering even starts, they had to set up all this stuff, right? They had to, put up tents so people could sleep and whatever it is. There's just all this work. And he said, I want to thank you all, but why should I do that when it's as much your system as it is mine? We're a family. Like, we're all contributing to do this together. So why should I thank you like it's, you're doing something for me when we're all doing this for each other, right? And I thought that was a great way to think about it. And I'd already come to a similar realization myself, that why should I quit because, there were things in the organization that were wrong or I didn't like. Plus, I am probably the most prominent truther in the system. And, like the system needs more truthers, right? Even though there's no place for people like that now. But the more truthers that come in, or more people start waking up, because Babaji said everyone needs to wake up. So it's going to happen. The system is collapsing more now, right? A lot more people are aware of it. A lot more people are waking up just because they see what's going on in the world now. And so right now, it isn't going that way. But what's to say in the future, like everyone will be like, oh yeah, you were just ahead of your time or whatever it is, right? And so I would be failing in my duty to this family and this organization that's done so much for me, because every organization needs to have more than one point of view. And so with me leaving, I would be doing a disservice and not allowing the change to inevitably happen. Because I believe, because Babaji said he wants everyone to wake up, everyone's going to have to farm at some point. And so all this stuff is going to come around. I know it is. Like I knew it back whenever, and I know it even more now. And so even though, people have a bad attitude towards me in the mission because of, things with the divorce and, whatever happened where people ended up getting wrong information or misjudging me or whatever. But I, don't care about that stuff. Like I went through a whole, and this made it easier for me to deal with the internet and YouTube and all those things over the years, because I realized I have a job and I just got to, go through it. And I've seen the way that the masters of the system, things that they had to go through, things in their lives, tough things. And I realized my life isn't, nearly as tough or as bad as that. And so for me, the system works, and the transmission, the cleaning of the transmission, I just can't live without them. It's just a part of my essence. It's like, food now, right? It's like going without oxygen or food or something. It's become something that, supports my life and my goals and everything, and the goal of my life, the spiritual goal of my life, the heartfulness system has delivered. Daji and Master Charji both delivered on a spiritual level. Whether, we're friends or not, or, whatever, whether we get along or things like that on a personal level, that's not necessary. You understand this? Whether we agree on everything or not isn't necessary. But Daji has, blessed me with lots of spiritual development over the past 5 years, which I'm grateful for. And so, yeah, he said those things about the masks, which, I already knew that he's a pharmacist and he's a mainstream person. And maybe that's, there's some reason. I believe there's some reason for that. It'd be great if he was open to these truther narratives. But if he's not, that isn't going to change, my relationship to him or my relationship to the mission on a spiritual level, because the system works. And I know it works for me and it works for many people, right? And if it works for you and you're bummed out about the, things he said, well, welcome to my world. It's just, inevitably, if the truther stuff is real, then it'll come around. And like I said, the truther stuff isn't an end. Being a truther isn't an end. Waking up to the, negative nature of our world culture, our, the shadow government, wherever it is, that's not the goal. Like that's a stepping stone or a catalyst to, de-indoctrinate you and wake you up to, a better goal, a more divine purpose to your existence. And so it's a catalyst, right? And the heartfulness represents the second thing, right? Represents a solution when you realize you can't go back to your old way of thinking and being dependent on the system, on the beast. All right, I don't know, this is like 3 hours long. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.